Question of the episode: what are you ready to bring in and let go as you step into your version of adulthood? While you take a second to think about it, let me introduce myself. Hi, my name is Elijah, but you can call me Lay. Welcome back to A Little Atypical, a space for the deep feelers and unconventional thinkers navigating wellness, personal development, and lifestyle with a little more nuance. I'm here to bring it girl intellect energy to the beauty, wellness, and personal development space by having the curiosity to dig beneath the surface. I like to talk about typical topics from a not so typical perspective, and that's exactly what we're going to do today. When people make ins and outs, we tend to make it for the short term, months, seasons, or sometimes to fit an aesthetic. However, something I thought of is, what if we did it for something more long term? Last March, for episodes 47 through 49, they were all about identity. And for specifically episode 48, it was my ins and outs episode for identity shifting, i.e. the process. Since it seems like a concept most people loved, I want to do it again, but this time for adulthood, or from my lens, womanhood. So just to give you a breakdown, I'm giving my top 3 ins and outs, and then I want to just give a brief on how I came up with mine and suggestions for when you come up with yours. Well, obviously, if something resonates with you, you can consider it as one of your own ins and outs, but I would highly recommend to explore what about it resonates with you so you can make it from the perspective of your own lived experiences. And with that being said, I actually think I just want to start with the outs because I do have a bit more stories and examples for those. So starting with a huge one, taking actions to prove myself due to ego. Here's the thing about ego. It shows up through whatever quote unquote currency you care about the most. So for some people, that is being seen as the greatest in their craft. Or for others, it's being desired for their looks. And for some of us, it is being known for our ideas, our voice, and the way we express them. In moments where that currency feels threatened, ego tends to reach for a familiar strategy. It tries to protect your identity by making you right, making you understood, making, well, in the final case, your intelligence feel obvious. And if you are someone who has spent a lot of time becoming self-aware, healing, growing, and getting off of autopilot mode, ego can get even sneakier because it disguises itself as being quote-unquote mature, being quote-unquote logical, being quote-unquote well-researched, and being the one who communicates well. So, in book club, we finished Their Eyes Were Watching God. Someone said one thing they did not like about the book was how it was promoted as Janie's self-discovery, but as a reader, they did not feel like they saw that. And I actually understood what they meant, but I thought part of the feeling might come from how the story was written. So with third-person narration, at least in my opinion, we don't get to live the character's eternal world the way we do in first person. Third person can feel like cinematic, like you're watching a movie. You see the actions, behaviors, external shifts. So the growth is there, but it could be more subtle because it is not always explained to you through the constant inner dialogue. There were perspectives on that and everything, but there was a quiet moment, so I kind of just asked the first question that popped into my head. Mostly to keep the conversation going because I do sometimes tend to feel weird about silence, and it's something I need to work on. But anyways, what I asked was, what is more foundational for growth in a person, mindset or action? And I want to emphasize, I know I said mindset on purpose because to me, mindset is not the same as the thoughts in your head, because there are so many thoughts that can happen through us and there's only so many that we're actually aware of. Anyways, they both answered mindset, which was not a problem, but the way one person explained their answer had this undertone that kind of triggered something in me. And at the moment, I didn't react outwardly because I was kind of focused trying to come up with an example because they asked me to elaborate. But later that night, I just couldn't sleep. I kept tossing and turning, and honestly, my body had this buzzy, restless feeling running through it. And even though I did finally fall asleep, I only got maybe 3 hours. And I didn't immediately connect it until I was like reflecting on it. But basically, the next day when I went on my walk to get some steps in the morning, of course, I just started typing in my notes something I was going to send to the group chat because that morning, the first thought I had was, I said mindset, not thought. I don't know what triggered that in my head, but anyways, I had this message drafted basically trying to like clarify that. I saved it in my notes, so I'm just going to read it. And to clarify, I did not send it, but keeping it and sharing it here feels like a good example of why sometimes you just really have to catch yourself. No matter how healed and mature you think you are, I do think sometimes, even in an evolved state, it does slip out. So, anyways, I typed, good morning. I did more research on what's more foundational for growth, mindset, or action. From what I found, thoughts and mindset aren't the same thing. We have about 6,200 to 70,000 thoughts a day, and thoughts are fleeting. Mindset is shaped by repeated thoughts plus action, and without action, it's hard to make it real or sustainable. I went down a rabbit hole of whether thinking counts as actions. The questions I was researching: what is mindset? Are thoughts and mindset the same thing? Which comes first, thoughts or mindset? How is mindset formed? If mindset is built on experiences, do you have to act to create experience? Do thoughts shape mindset, or does mindset shape thoughts? Are new actions and new experiences basically the same thing? Can you have a mindset without action? If someone is depressed, should they change their mindset or actions? And in the middle of typing it, I caught myself because I could feel that I was not doing it purely to add value. I was doing it because my ego felt bruised. I was doing it because I felt misunderstood. I was doing it because a part of me wanted to reclaim the image of being smart. And that is the out. Taking action to prove myself due to ego. When the motive is ego, the action is rarely clean. It's usually mixed with defensiveness, urgency, and the need to be perceived a certain way. So I did not send it. And that is what I mean when I say adulthood is learning to pause at the edge of action and ask, is this coming from truth, or is this coming from my ego trying to protect itself? Because sometimes growth is not the message you send. Sometimes growth is the message you do not. People will never know that growth happened because they cannot see the internal shift. They can only see the external actions you take. So a lot of emotional work in adulthood is getting comfortable with the private growth. The kind that is real but invisible. The growth where you can feel triggered, you can feel sensitivity, you can feel the urge to prove yourself, and you choose to act in integrity regardless, anyway. And that was my moment, and it made me realize something. It is not that I cannot handle disagreement. It is that I have to be mindful about when disagreement turns into a subconscious threat to my identity. Because the moment I start to feel like I have to defend my intelligence, defend my intentions, defend my openness, I'm no longer acting out of curiosity. I am in ego protection mode. And in my adulthood journey, that is something I want to be out of. Now, the next out I have is overall black and white thinking. Originally, my second out was literally going to be called calling what other people are doing realistic or unrealistic. Because as someone who creates content, as much as I consume it, I've been thinking about how quickly people on the internet try to shut down someone's experience by calling it unrealistic. And I think sometimes I unconsciously do this too. So, however, after reflecting some more, I realized I should go more expansive than just realistic and unrealistic because of what my algorithm has been feeding me lately. So, I'm going to use a recent example that got people heated on TikTok. So, there's this girl who shared that she felt jealous of a friend. I'll try to remember to share the video and maybe a few diverse opinions. I'm sorry if I do forget. Like sometimes I have it in a document and somehow I don't know what happens. But, anyways, while in this example, I don't think I am thinking black and white, but many people perspectives on the topic was so limiting, it made me think about if I'm practicing black and white thinking in general, if that makes sense. And so, before I get into my perspective, I want to state this clearly that I'm not here to dogpile because I felt like I saw so much of that already. But I'm also not here to act like jealousy is cute or excuse jealous behavior. I'm just here because the reaction to her story proved my point about black and white thinking and why I think it's so important to address. In the comments, it wasn't even a conversation anymore. It was just two extremes yelling at each other. So you got one side saying jealousy is normal. You have the other side saying jealousy is not normal and you're a bad person and go to therapy. Which, that, I don't know. I always hate when people, like, I am a believer of therapy, but also the cost and accessibility of therapy isn't always realistic. I personally, if someone wants to like work on that more, I would honestly like send ideas for reflection or, like podcasts or anything that also is like more about these things. Maybe if a licensed therapist does it, but anyways, I would just send suggestions that maybe if it's not as accessible, but anyways, I'm getting off track. And I know, trust me, I really do know that that's just the way of the internet to act like that. But at the same time, I'm just sitting there like, do y'all hear yourselves? And I don't mean that in a judgmental way, at least not completely. Because we use normal like it's a moral badge, but something being not normal has never stopped it from existing. And normal describes what is frequent, while moral describes what is good or right. And of course, both of these things are subjective, but there are so many things that I find not normal: racism, sexism, predators. Matter of fact, I have a long list and it can go on. And me calling those things not normal, unfortunately, does not erase them from existence. If anything, refusing to talk about dark things just makes them grow in silence. By definition, what is considered normal refers to common, average behavior or social conventions, while morality dictates what is right, wrong, or ethical. Common behavior is not automatically moral, and normal does not always mean right. So, even if people are saying like jealousy is normal, they're saying it in the sense of the frequency or in the fact that it exists. So, if jealousy is supposedly this scary thing that gets people hurt, or even something further, talking about it is not the problem. Avoiding it is, suppressing it is, pretending it doesn't exist is. And this is where the black and white thinking really showed. People act like if you process something out loud, you're automatically endorsing it. like reflection equals normalization. Like naming an emotion makes it right. But I actually think what that girl was sharing was important. Something I feel like people are missing from the discussion is different mindsets will process things differently. And I also think so many people are trying to center the conversation on beauty and use it to talk about how when people got on this app and say they have people jealous of them, people say they need to be humble, and instantly when they bring it back to that, I just know they're using that person to validate themselves. I saw a few people mention how jealousy stems from self-hatred or insecurity, and while I feel like that is a starting point, I feel like we're not touching on the main issue, and maybe because people are so focused on the fact it was someone so personal to the person. I did a whole theme about the digital world and focusing on comparison, and I feel like this topic would be less reactive if we can look at it from that perspective. Because even if you were able to process your feelings into inspiration, can you understand making comparison to a celebrity or anyone you don't know personally? To not specifically a person, but relevant to an aspect of your identity, like your age group, gender group, i.e., feeling behind for your age, or like you don't necessarily fit into what's expected of you, or an experience someone had, whether it is more materialistic, like being able to travel, or something like coming from a supportive family, or just having a specific support system. And if not any of that, can you understand being compared to others or see how it happens in our society? In many dynamics, we are taught to compare, even in our personal lives. If you ever heard the phrases, why can't you be more like blank? When I was your age, blank. Or you're supposed to because you're a blank. You understand comparison. And if you still say jealousy doesn't make sense, unfortunately, like the things I listed before, there is inferiority/superiority baked into jealousy as well. Just like in racism, just like in sexism, just like in predatory behavior. My belief is jealousy stems from a fixed mindset. And like I said, it's hard to work on a mindset you don't even know you have. And people saying that jealousy is a time to look inward, technically, that person did that by having awareness of the emotion and removing herself. But I would like to say just because something requires you to look inward, it doesn't mean it can't be processed out loud. When people tell any stories online, it is not always for the same reasons. And if making it into a video helps her to think more on the topic of jealousy and to gain perspective she probably didn't think of and give others more to reflect on, it's an objectively good thing. The whole "this should have been a diary entry" argument made me laugh because it is so selective. Because on social media, one side of this conversation is protected. People can get online and say, I have haters. People are jealous of me. I have ops. But the second someone says, I was a jealous friend, now it's keep that to yourself, go journal, work on yourself, seek help. And I'm just like, if the topic is about social dynamics, why is one perspective allowed and the other is taboo? And this is the part that I just don't get, because people immediately turned it into there must be a victim, there must be a villain. And I saw someone say, how come there are always videos about people being jealous of you, but suddenly nobody is the jealous friend? And I was just like, exactly. Because for the first statement to be true, jealousy has to exist somewhere. So even if you're saying, oh, jealousy isn't normal, it still exists, you know? It doesn't make sense because you have so much people in media, even songs, hype songs that talk about people having ops, people not liking you, people watching them. So if that doesn't exist and jealousy isn't something common and everything like that, how would any of that be true? And the thing is, I want people to become more honest, because if you villainize someone for admitting to the emotion, people will stop admitting the emotion to themselves. And that's where it becomes dangerous. I did bring my perspective to someone in a more one-on-one conversation because I wanted another lens. I wanted to make sure what I was seeing made sense and to have a balanced perspective on this. I also just think people who are saying jealousy is normal are still looking at the smallest picture, because the more important question is not if jealousy is normal or not. It's what do you do when jealousy shows up? So, yeah, I did a short version of my perspective on TikTok. And honestly, it was really hard speaking in front of a camera like that. And I have to give props to people who could just like yap on TikTok because it's hard. But points I was trying to hit on that video is we need to properly define jealousy versus envy. She seems aware of her feelings and to some degree her thoughts, but I'm not completely sure if she was aware of her mindset because of the way she was wording certain things. And people are way too hung up on her hypothetical because, okay, so in her explanation, she does use a hypothetical, and I will admit her example for something she was trying to explain wasn't the best, because it was essentially using the example of a lawyer. And people were like, a lawyer still has to work hard though. She was very vague, and I think the best way she could have saved that example was essentially using any of the things I mentioned from episode 79, which was about why a standard timeline shouldn't exist. The point she was trying to make about why she was jealous was inherited lifestyle. The inherited lifestyle conversation matters because while there is aspects of our lifestyle we choose, such as what we prioritize, who we spend time with, what we want to learn, like once we go to college anyways, etc. But everyone, regardless of lifestyle choices, still has elements that were given, Her example was attempting to point to something society is so pick and choose to speak about, which is privilege, effort, and work ethic. I read an article recently from CNBC because someone brought it up, and I'll try to include everything I talk about, but essentially it was interviewing a director at a wealth management and planning company who says people who primarily range in a network from 100 million to over 1 billion specifically are concerned about their children between 22 and 35-year-old, that they won't be able to sustain careers in traditionally stable and lucrative industries like technology, law, and medicine. So I'm just going to say a quote that stood out to me the most, which was, even as many of them likely have enough money to cover their kids' living expenses for many years, they're realizing if they don't pass on more meaningful wealth to their children, or if their children are not able to accumulate wealth, their kids could have less agency over their lives than they did, he says. To be clear, the difficult hiring market likely doesn't signify a major threat to the ultra wealthy's financial status. Most people with such a high net worth aren't in danger of losing their homes or canceling lavish vacations. But the rich typically want to spend their money efficiently and keep their children from having to make lifestyle trade-offs. I felt like this was a hard read because they admit that their basic needs aren't at risk, nor the life-enriching experiences. They are worried about lifestyle trade-offs. I feel like between January and February posts, my stance is clear for the people who understand there is so many layers to it. I believe in putting effort into things, especially when it comes from a positive standpoint. I don't think we need to burn ourselves out to put effort in our lives or go to extremes, and that shouldn't be considered lazy or a poor work ethic. I think we need to stop assuming we can measure someone's work ethic from the outside, and we should be able to acknowledge privileges do exist, not just through money and materials. And our lives can be at ease in some ways while being simultaneously difficult in others. We shouldn't erase the conversation of privilege, because if you erase it, then any conversation about comparison becomes fake and shallow. And this is why I brought up that billionaire story, because when you live in a world where even the wealthy people are openly saying that they're worried that their children won't be able to sustain careers in stable industries and might need lifestyle trade-offs that are less about survival and more about comfort. Articles like this exist, and many of it is pointing to the job market issues primarily being because of AI and economic uncertainty causing established workers to cling to their jobs instead of going deeper. And it proves why we need to be able to have honest discussions about privilege, but at the same time, have honest discussions about effort, doing things within your capacity, and why we need to stop measuring people's work ethic in such confined ways. We need to be able to have all these conversations, not to coddle anybody, to excuse anybody, or to be bitter, but to be accurate, because black and white thinking will have us doing one of the two things. One, erasing privilege so we can keep it the fantasy that the world is fair if you just work hard enough. Or two, erasing effort so we can keep the fantasy that no one has agency. And both aren't effective. My out is about the extremes, so I can make sure that I can actually look at conversations from practicing discernment and objectivity, because sometimes black and white thinking can give the illusion of clarity. You can hold two truths at once. You can critique without cruelty. You can acknowledge harm without turning somebody into a villain. You can name an emotion without romanticizing it. And you can talk about the darker parts of being human without acting like talking is the same as normalizing. Now, for the final out I have is taking myself too seriously. Because when you take everything seriously, your life turns into this constant evaluation. And going forward, I will probably not have any more specific examples for this one and the ends. With this out, it was essentially just about the feeling of I want to fall back in love with living. I don't have a specific story for this because it shows up in the smallest moments. It's quiet pressure that always seems compressed, always trying to say the right things, always trying to look like you have it together. And I want to be clear, I'm not unaware of the more serious things happening in the world. There are real things happening, real responsibilities, real pain, real destruction. But when I say that I want to stop taking things too seriously, I'm essentially referring to how I've been treating my personal life like everything is high stakes. Like it's embarrassing to be messy or cringe or wrong or human. Taking everything so seriously looks like being scared to look stupid, just holding back because I don't want to be misunderstood, turning normal awkwardness into a character flaw. And I want out of that. I want to let myself be seen trying, let myself be a little cringe at moments, let myself dance on camera without it needing to be perfect. Let myself say something and not replay it for days upon days. I want to do life with a little more lightness, not because nothing matters, but because I don't want my day to day feel like I'm trying to pass a test. And I don't even, what is even the test anymore? I don't know. And now for the ends. Because if I'm letting go of urgency, ego, and extremes, I need things to replace them with, you know? So I'm just going to do a rapid fire of my ends. The first in is going to be being at peace with the way my life is unfolding. So personally, I've been letting go of the idea that my life has to hit milestones in a certain order to count. And I feel like that was obvious from, how I talked about the late blooming experience last month. And honestly, the more I release that timeline, the calmer I feel. I wake up with more flow, being more present and less of like that restless pressure to kind of have certainty about what's next. I think part of what I was fighting was this cultural obsession with certainty, where, for example, every take has to be the answer and every person has to position themselves as an expert. But my goal with life, and honestly, this podcast, is discovery, playing with ideas, letting my perspectives evolve in real time. I'm not an expert on life, I'm just paying attention to how mine is unfolding. And lately, I've been asking myself questions like, why am I acting like I need a full time job before 26 to be valid when contract roles and temporary seasons can also give me room to explore what skills and industries I want for the long term? Because something I know true to be about myself is I'm very multi passionate, and I'm kind of done internalizing that idea that makes me a unreliable person, a scattered, quote unquote, scattered person. Multi passionate people often are the explorers, the ones who connect dots beyond what experts are trained to notice. So, this is me being at peace with the unfolding, not because I'm passive or anything like that, or I don't know what I want, because the reality is I do, but I don't know yet in which way it will be expressed in my life, if I'm going to be honest. But I'm personally so done trying to control the order of the way my life is unfolding. Second thing is not losing myself in the pursuit of building myself. So this one is kind of an extension on the first thing I said, but slightly more personal. So in 2024, I mentioned losing my spark, and I don't think I ever fully named what was behind that, because when I think about it, I think I was trying to build myself in every category at once, between college, taking a bunch of minor courses, work experience, content creation, like it was already a full-time business, because people kept saying, oh, if that's what you want, you have to act like it in the full degree. And just trying to constantly become more while also learning how to build a life with someone. And piece by piece, I started to lose myself in the process. I had this moment of reflection where I promised myself I'm not doing that again. Because building yourself should not require self abandonment. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying like there aren't aspects of you that aren't supposed to change, because we're supposed to change. We're human, we're supposed to evolve. But does evolution require that loss of who we are to that degree? Sometimes I think it doesn't. Sometimes I feel like if you push that way, it leads you to forget which parts of you are actually you. And I think in this era where everyone is constantly leveling up, we forget that the present you matters too. Past, present, and future. You are all one person. So I'm trying to be considerate of what I need now and not just what future me would benefit from. Because if I always wait for something to be good, there are times when you have to do that, but there are times you also need to be present with yourself. I'm not postponing my humanity until I'm healed enough, productive enough, or successful enough. I'm learning how to build a better life without breaking myself down to earn it, essentially. And the last thing I listed was letting curiosity lead instead of urgency. So I feel like this is a common theme throughout all the ones I already mentioned. So I'm giving myself permission to explore, obviously, contract roles, new skills, new industries, new versions of me. Because, like I said, being multi passionate is not a flaw, and I shouldn't have to defend that aspect of me constantly. It's just simply a way of noticing patterns, making connections, and creating a life that feels full. So, there you have my ins. Now I'm going to get into how to create your own ins and outs. It's just a little list that I think that I mostly did when I was creating my own. So the first thing is start with real conversations. So pay attention to the conversations you are having, the conversations you're avoiding, the conversations happening around you. Be observational, like what topics bring out honesty, defensiveness, performative, maturity, or people pleasing in you. Let that guide you first, and then you can start from one real friction point. So you can say to yourself something like, adult me is tired of, and then just make whatever comes out your outs, and then pick one adult value to anchor your list. So I think I mentioned last episode, like, to work on your values, and this is where it really shines. So it could be something like stability, freedom, integrity, self-trust, curiosity, community, and your in should support whatever value you are currently focusing on. And when you're writing your outs, make sure to write them as behaviors you can actually change. So use like out the habit of, or out when I, instead of trying to say like people, and like, because that is different, because one is controlling your behavior, one is trying to control people. And while it is okay to have boundaries, that is a very different type of exercise than what we're trying to do. Next, make each item specific enough to practice this week. So try to make it not too vague. Then the next suggestion I have is add a boundary line when it's relevant. So you can say, like, I'm no longer available for blank, so I will blank. So this is about your choices. And like I said, it is a little different than making an out about someone else, because when you create a boundary line, it is about your choices and not someone else's character. Next, at some point, do a motivation check. So ask yourself like why you're doing something. So it could be, am I doing this to feel safe and aligned, or am I doing this because it looks right, to be superior, to be unbothered, to be chosen? 8, I believe, is to add an example of a lived experience. And it could be like a simple one sentence line like, this shows up when blank, because you just need proof for yourself. And then pair every in with a replacement behavior. So that can look like, instead of like doom scrolling, you can like wind down by like reading a book or doing crossword, or having a set playlist that you listen to something. And then the last thing is, make sure after the reflection to end with a promise to yourself. So that is all for the episode. I'm very sorry about my voice. And to close out, I'm just going to end this episode with a currently I am, and of course a card pull. So currently I am reading Parable of the Sower. I am on chapter 14, and I have to return the book on March 15th. So I broke down to read about 3 chapters a day. And on my Kindle, I also have the first book of the Bridgerton series as my more optional read, because Parable of the Sower is book club related, and I enjoy both for different reasons. But I don't know how to rate Parable because I think it's my first sci-fi book, so I don't really know what my system for rating it will be. Currently I honestly defaulted back to watching Host Club because I have nothing really I want to watch, but I was thinking about watching a sports anime until Heartbreak High and Exo Kitty comes out. Currently, I am listening to, I found this song that lyrically describes me so well, but because it gives me more vibes, I'm trying to evolve from I only listened to a few times. So it's called Steady by Bella K, and I just love it. But for songs that I am currently listening to that are more like upbeat and just better for my mindset right now, that is just better for my mindset right now, is Risk It All by Bruno Mars, The Show Goes On by Lupe Fiasco, Am I Wrong, Don't Stop Till You Get Enough, Time of Our Lives, Uptown Funk, New Religion. That one I think is a new release by BB Rexa. But basically, it's my anti-crash out playlist. So whenever I feel like I'm about to crash out, I choose those songs for emotional regulation. Currently, I'm grateful for, I feel like I always say the foundational things. So like family members I love, to have a home with said family, the support I've been getting with creation, the conversations I've been having, the new experiences that are to come even if they haven't arrived yet, and of course like books. Currently I am learning / improving on just showing my personality more through my content, and not making every post has to be like something really serious, especially on social media, where I feel like it doesn't give me the space to deep dive anyways. So I will always like deep dive on my podcast, deep dive on blog posts, but I'm okay with just being goofier and sharing things that I find that are well said and interesting. Because if one thing I learned after trying to record an opinion on something, it's too much pressure to speak fast, and I just feel like when I try to do it, I have to be engaging and cover all the bases to avoid backlash. And it made me realize why, even if I want to talk about more topics that are important, social media would not be the best place suited for someone like me, who is still practicing the best avenues of expression for myself. Lastly, currently I'm feeling, honestly, it depends on what you're asking about. In relation to my personal life, I feel calm. In relation to things external, I feel disgusted, or, like kind of observational. Like, in what ways does it relate to a bigger picture? And now for the card pull. Remember, if card pulls aren't your thing, and this is where you click off, thank you for listening, and be sure to come back next week. Follow the podcast so you can stay up to date on new episodes. And before you go, if this episode resonated, I'd love for you to take 10 seconds to rate the podcast 5 stars. It truly does help the show reach more people and help this little community get discovered. For today's reading, we pulled from the Moonology deck since sometime after this is posted, either the 17th or the 18th, there will be a new moon in Pisces, and the card we got for the episode is full moon in Cancer, which is a personal issue reaches resolution. Things are likely to get heated as full moon in Cancer is a super emotional sign. So there could be something of an explosion of feelings around now or surrounding your question. It's important to be sensitive to other people when you pull this card. There are some very fine sensibilities around, so thread carefully as you move towards your goals or dreams. This card indicates an especially feminine time. It also heralds the time to deal with any family issues coming up. Nothing to worry about. It signals challenge is now coming to an end. This card also suggests both a domestic matter or private issue will soon come to a head. It's a great time to move houses. The answer to your question lies in being a kind leader. This is the time for you to step up and agree to overcome your insecurities. Attuned to the moon, it may be best to move towards what you want in a sideways manner. Additional meanings for this card: meditate and soothe heightened emotions. Don't be clingy. Stop sulking. Have you had enough family time lately? The teaching: the heightened emotion of the moon Cancer combination can't be ignored. However, Cancer is one of the moon's two home signs, along with Taurus. So, astrologically speaking, the moon loves to be in this sign. In fact, she rules Cancer. This means that with this card, there's a sense of all is as it should be, or don't worry, all will soon be well. And that's all for today. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode of A Little Atypical. I'm very sorry my voice started to act up. And if you found this helpful, don't forget to subscribe and share with someone who might need to hear this message. Remember, view the description box where you can find important links such as the one to my website where there's so much more bonus content, and things can also be found on my Substack. And I just started to add podcast over there, although it does make it a little more difficult for tracking analytics. But I also wanted my podcast to be accessible over there. And if you do find me on Substack, don't forget to sign up to subscribe so that you never miss like a newsletter update or anything. Until next time, have a good day, evening, or night, and stay authentically atypical. Okay, bye.